Hi, I'm George Page for Nature. When we think of sea life, most of us conjure up visions of those creatures that live under the ocean's surface. The fishes in all their forms, the crustaceans, the mammals, the magnificent whales and dolphins. But birds, seabirds, are as much a part of ocean life as fishes. Many species cross the ocean's vast expanses without ever coming close to man's crowded coasts. When they do touch down, it's often on some utterly remote and uninhabited island. Lars Lufgren, a leading authority on seabirds, has called these winged beings of the salt air the last great adventurers on Earth. The Arctic tern, for example, literally migrates from pole to pole, a distance of about 11,000 miles. Our seabird this week on Nature is the bird which, with his cruel bow, he laid full low, the harmless albatross. In the great poem by Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We'll go out there, 3,200 miles across the Pacific to Midway Island, site of one of World War II's most important battles and the breeding ground for the Goonie bird, the fabled albatross. The Laysan albatross, more commonly known as the Goonie, one of the world's largest seabirds and one of the most beautiful. In flight, the albatross is an unparalleled symphony of motion. At the far western end of the Hawaiian island chain, 1,200 miles northwest of Honolulu, sits a coral atoll called Midway. Made up of two tiny islands, Sand and Eastern, Midway is home to more than 1/3 of the world's population of the Laysan albatross. Amazingly, when the young albatross tries its wings for the first time and leaves Midway Island, it does not return to land for as long as 7 years. For those long years, the bird sails alone over the empty waters of the North Pacific. Its epic flight does not end until it's ready to mate. Then it returns to Midway. As many as 1 million Laysan albatross make their home on Midway. During the nesting season, the small island is literally carpeted with birds. Midway belonged to the birds, undisturbed, until the mid-19th century, when shipwrecks on the surrounding coral reefs made man aware of the remote islands. In those days, egg collectors and feather hunters were quick to take advantage of the abundant life on these islands. Cargoes of brine-pickled eggs soon made their way around the world. It was not until 1935 that civilization arrived at Midway. Ships from Pan American World Airways harbored at Midway, and crews constructed a base on the island. Midway became a stopping point for the China Clipper, the first trans-Pacific airliner. Suddenly being linked to the rest of the world had little real impact on the Goonie birds until June 4th, 1942. a fleet of U.S. Navy warships and planes intercepted a Japanese attack force on its way to invade Midway. The Battle of Midway was one of the most furiously fought of World War II and was the decisive turning point of the war in the Pacific. The island itself suffered serious damage, and casualties, both human and avian, were heavy. The Goonies were caught up in the onslaught of 20th century violence. But as the tide of war swept on to other locales, the survivors on Midway began life anew amid the smoking wreckage. Soon, the birds overran the island again. Things had changed on Midway. The island's strategically important location was fully appreciated by the American Navy. In the 1950s, a $40 million building plan increased the size of the airfield and facilities. Crowding around the busy runways, the Goonies became a dangerous nuisance. Planes and birds don't mix. Having just won one war, the Navy was faced with another conflict. Operation Bedsheet was the first salvo fired. The Goonies have never suffered from any land-based predators and therefore have no fear of man at all. Goonies 1, United States Navy 0. A more drastic measure was needed. Operation Skirmish Line pitted a few brave sailors armed only with rifles firing blanks against whole armies of stubborn Goonies. Goonies 2, Navy nothing. When that didn't work, smoke bombs were tried. The enemy barely noticed the attack. Goonies 3, Navy zip. But the Navy finally got serious. A bird the size of a Goonie can do considerable damage if it collides with an airplane. Clearly, the Goonies were a threat to national security. In a controlled program recommended by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, bulldozers moved in and just buried the birds alive. Between 1957 and 1964, 59,000 adult Goonies were killed and hundreds of thousands of eggs were destroyed. Another 10,000 birds were killed each year in accidents related to man's presence. But in the end, the Goonies remained the victors. Despite all the killing, the birds kept crowding the island in ever greater numbers, returning to the same nesting sites year after year. Finally, realizing that the birds don't like pavement and tend to stay on the grass, the Navy, in a last-ditch effort, paved half the island. Now, with airplanes and birds segregated, a compromise was reached. A truce was declared. Monuments to the fallen heroes were erected. The war was over. Today, the Navy and the Goonies coexist in harmony. In fact, when man brought in topsoil and trees to make the island more pleasant for himself, he created a better habitat for the Goonie bird. Despite the past troubles, now it's the Navy that protects the Goonies and their nesting sites. The island has become a wildlife sanctuary, home to more birds than ever before. The Goonies nest on nearly any piece of ground that is not covered with concrete. Sometimes Midway Island seems like nothing more than one huge nest. Other species, such as the frigate bird, have taken advantage of the newly created environment and the protection offered by the U.S. Navy. The frigate birds share the sky with the Goonies, but unlike them, nest in bushes rather than on the ground. They compete with one another for nesting materials, often stealing twigs from another's nest. The red-footed booby can also raise its chick in the protection of the new sanctuary. The ironwood tree was imported by man, but provides shelter for the red-tailed tropic bird and its chick. The angelically beautiful fairy tern doesn't bother to take advantage of the many trees that now grow on the island, or to even build a nest. It simply lays its egg, almost anywhere. The decor may leave much to be desired, but when Mom brings home a fish dinner like this, it's hard to complain. Midway is also home to the black-footed albatross. Slightly larger than the lazen, it prefers to nest in the sand along the beach. Flocks of knotty terns also frequent the beaches. The Hawaiian monk seal is an endangered species with fewer than 1,500 individuals remaining. Their largest decline has been at Midway, where they've practically disappeared. The major cause of their continuing decline has been human disturbance. Females are especially sensitive to human activity on the beaches, which forces them to remain in near-shore waters for long periods of time. Here, they're prime targets for tiger sharks, which patrol these beaches in large numbers. The resulting high mortality among females has led to a high ratio of males to females. Frustrated males seeking a mate then compound the problem by attacking the females continually, giving them no rest and sometimes wounding them severely. The adult Goonies converge on Midway in late October, driven by the instinctive urge to return to their nesting sites. They left the island 4 months ago, when last year's young were nearly grown. Those young are now spending their long adolescence at sea, while their parents return to breed again. The Goonie has just spent long weeks soaring over endless water, searching for food, depending upon its superior navigational skills to guide it home. With one of the greatest wingspans in the world, the albatross makes flight a fluid exercise of graceful ease. Within a 2-week period, hundreds of thousands of Goonies return to the island, each finding its own nesting site from the previous year. Contrary to popular belief, most landings are good ones. Like the pilot of an airplane, the Goonie has several tools to aid in its landing. The webbed feet splay out, cupping into the wind, acting as air brakes. The tail drops and spreads, slowing the bird's speed. Its wings braking its forward motion, it drops lightly to the ground. As long as the wind conditions are good, the landings are impressive, but winds are known to change. To the Goonie, any landing it can walk away from is a good landing. Goonies mate for life, which can be as long as 60 years. Their elaborately stylized ritual dance establishes the pair bond. The black-footed albatross has a different dance. The dance ritual is not necessarily reserved for the breeding pair. It becomes contagious. Blood runs high during courtship, and sometimes females are the victims of several overly stimulated males. These attacks almost never result in successful mating. Males defend their mates aggressively. Gooneys are 8 years old before they mate. The mated pair will always return to this spot each year and reinforce their lifetime bond through such behavior as the dance and ritual grooming. Followed by symbolic nest building. As long as the nest building is symbolic, the male is glad to help. But when it comes time to build the real nest, the female is left alone. She uses whatever's handy to build the simple nest. And like the frigate bird, she's not above a little stealing. This is a quiet time in the Goonie colony, a time of peaceful expectancy. Sometime in late November or early December, a single egg is laid. The two Gooneys trade off brooding duties, with one adult staying away for as long as 2 weeks before relieving its partner. The brooding Goonie will not leave the nest even to eat. The Gooneys sit quietly from one end of the island to the other. To them, no place is off limits. Gooneys take parenting very seriously. Perhaps a bit too seriously. Navy golfers have the handicap of playing on a course full of birds, plus the extra disadvantage of the Goonie's strong brooding instinct. As far as the Goonie is concerned, if it's round and white, hatch it. By the end of January or the beginning of February, the eggs begin to hatch. The chick first pecks a hole or pit in the egg. It may take as long as 6 more days before hatching out, and its parents don't help. One of the first threats the chick faces is the heavy webbed feet and powerful beaks of its parents. 20% of the chicks are lost at this critical time. Having survived its first hurdle, the little Goonie chick dries out and becomes a small ball of fluffy down. Like most seabirds, the chick is born with an instinct to peck at a spot on its parent's bill to beg for food. The parent encourages this behavior by lowering its beak to the chick's level. Soon they will feed the chick an energy-rich liquid food by regurgitation. Under the enveloping cover of its parent's soft underside, the chick seems well protected. But winter rains in the north-central Pacific can be harsh, with howling winds that force the birds to the ground. The helpless chicks are exposed to wind-blown sand and drenching water. The adult's feathers are coated with oils and provide excellent protection from the elements. But the chick's down acts like a sponge, absorbing the cold water. Low-lying areas of the island soon fill with the rising water of the torrential rains. But the Goonies will not abandon their nests. They must simply endure the weather. Eventually, the sun returns and the water begins to drain off the island. Though casualties were heavy, most of the chicks have survived. They grow rapidly, but retain their down covering. When a chick is hungry and its parent's belly is less than full, it must peck vigorously to stimulate feeding. In this case, the chick's pecking doesn't excite the adult enough. Perhaps seeking stimulation elsewhere, this adult approaches another chick and attacks it. Then it returns and feeds its own chick. The rapidly growing chicks require constant feeding. The adult Goonies continually fly out to sea to search for food, usually small squid. Some don't make it back. The remaining parent, needing to search for its own food, soon deserts the chick, leaving it to starve. At the age of 4 weeks, the chicks can get around on their own and start to venture away from their nests. At a very early age, Goonies are fiercely territorial and will permit no trespassing. The adults are drawn to the fight, but do nothing about it. For the most part, life for the chicks on Midway is quiet and uneventful. But as they become more mobile, they manage to wander out into the road. By leaving the grass and blocking the pavement, they unwittingly violate the truce between man and bird. Such violations are dealt with quickly and unceremoniously. Sometimes it's easier just to go around. Night falls on Midway and the activity of the day lessens. Flight operations for airplanes as well as for Goonies come to a stop. Very light sleepers, they are easily distracted. Gathering under a bright light, the Goonies seem to enjoy their own version of shadow dancing. Another bird active at night is the bonin petrel. The pigeon-sized petrel digs its nest in the sandy earth beneath the sod. Sadly, the burrow affords no protection against rats. Accidentally introduced during the war, rats destroy 90% of petrel eggs, making this chick a rarity. The petrel can throw sand 8 to 10 feet while digging its 4-foot-long burrow, sometimes pelting a puzzled Goonie chick. This kind of disturbance has become increasingly rare because a once thriving colony of 500,000 petrels has been reduced to less than 2,000 birds. The well-kept green lawns are obviously prime real estate, but you have to put up with the gardener. In recent years, the size of the naval base on Midway has been cut back drastically. Once there were 4,000 people. Today, there are only a few hundred. The children of military personnel once laughed and played in what is now becoming a ghost town. Buildings are being abandoned by humans, but not by the Goonies. Unfortunately, some of the condemned structures hold new hazards for the Goonie chicks. The paint used when the buildings were erected contains lead. The young birds pick off the peeling paint, eat it, and go into convulsions. An adult Goonie stands by helplessly as its chick dies of lead poisoning. The Navy is working to eliminate the hazard by destroying the buildings. As the Navy demolishes the old buildings and restores part of Midway to pre-war conditions, it also creates more space where Goonies can nest. The chicks continue to grow rapidly, and they're beginning to shed their down. The adults have done their job. The chicks, though still demanding food, are grown and healthy. Now, 6 months old, they weigh more than their parents. Their fat reserves will enable them to survive on their own when in late July, the adults leave. At last free from the responsibilities of parenthood, they will spend the next 4 months at sea. As is always the case, the ease of takeoff depends on the wind conditions. Despite difficulties during takeoff, once airborne, the Goonie is simply magnificent. While their parents are riding the cool ocean breezes, the chicks are left sitting on their nests. They can last 2 to 3 weeks without food. In that time, they must shed their down and learn to fly, all on their own. Meanwhile, the harsh summer sun beats down on them. Some fall prey to a condition called droopwing, probably caused by a calcium deficiency. These won't last long. As heat, disease, and hunger begin to take their toll, the dead Goonies must be removed for sanitary purposes. There's little shelter from the Pacific sun. The young birds pant rapidly, trying to keep cool as they wait for the changes to happen within their bodies. Rain would make their lives much easier, but in lieu of that, a lawn sprinkler will suffice. The water is a welcome relief for a lucky few. The other birds must wait for an occasional rain shower, when all of them will benefit. And some benefit more than others. Any slight breeze makes the young Goonies realize they have wings. They begin the involved process of learning to use these complex tools. Step by step, they follow their instincts toward their goal. Flight itself is comparatively easy. Getting off the ground is the tough part. Then there are those who try to take the easy way out. At last, a place where the wind is steady and dependable. It's at this point that the immature Goonies find the wide-open, breezy spaces of the naval runways. With freely blowing winds and unrestricted space for takeoff, the airstrip seems like the perfect practice field. The young Goonie gets its first taste of the freedom of flight. These eyes have just seen a whole new world open before them.
Alpha radio, request bird sweep for landing aircraft.
Every year at this time, a Goonie patrol has its work cut out for it. They have to clear the large concrete runways. A bird sucked into a jet engine can cause $250,000 worth of damage. These birds will get a free lift to the beach, which is where they wanted to be in the first place. The young Goonies must now become accustomed to the vast ocean, which will be their only companion in the years to come. Though they were hatched only a short distance away, they've never seen the water that will be so important to their lives. They have to learn how to survive in this new environment. Some will not have the chance to make a second mistake. A few perish in the unfamiliar environment. But those that survive are now living their last few moments as land-bound creatures. A large monk seal is doing to the Goonies what they did to the Navy, obstructing the runway. This obstruction, however, is not so easily moved. Goonies still crowd the beach, but one by one, they find their wings and look toward the sky. Now the young Goonies begin that incredible maiden voyage. Up to 7 years at sea, never touching land. Nothing but the wide Pacific below them.